In South Korea, millions of people rent their homes without paying a single one in monthly rent. Instead, they hand the landlord a lump sum worth tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes their entire life savings. And 2 years later, they expect every last one back. This arrangement is called Jeonse, and for generations it was treated as one of the safest financial moves a Korean family could make. But between 2022 and 2024, something went badly wrong. Tens of thousands of tenants found their deposits had simply vanished. The question this raises is not a small one. How does a housing system trusted by an entire nation collapse? And who ends up paying? The scale of Jeonse is difficult to overstate. According to Statistics Korea, roughly 40 to 45% of all Korean households have rented at some point under the Jeonse system, making it one of the most widely used rental structures in the world. A typical Jeonse deposit in Seoul reached an average of around 300 million won, approximately $230,000, at the peak of the market in 2021, according to KB real estate data. When property prices then fell sharply through 2022 and 2023, the Bank of Korea flagged that Jeonse deposits in many cases exceeded the actual market value of the property itself. Korean media and legal sources reported that fraud cases involving Jeonse, known as Jeonse fraud or Jeonse sagi, affected an estimated 40,000 households by 2023, with total losses estimated in the trillions of won. The Korea Housing Finance Corporation also reported that the number of Jeonse-backed loan products had expanded dramatically in the years before the collapse, deepening the financial exposure of ordinary families. To understand why Jeonse collapsed, you first need to understand why it ever existed. The system emerged in the 1960s and 70s when Korean banks were largely inaccessible to ordinary landlords seeking capital. A tenant's lump sum deposit functioned as an informal loan. The landlord used the money to invest, run a business, or purchase another property, and the tenant got free accommodation in exchange for the interest income the landlord effectively earned on that float. For decades, rising property prices underpinned the whole arrangement. A landlord always knew the apartment would be worth more in 2 years, so returning the deposit carried little risk. Banks then accelerated the system further by offering Jeonse-backed loans, allowing tenants to borrow against the deposit they had placed. The mechanism worked beautifully in a rising market, but it carried a hidden structural fragility. The entire system depended on property values never falling significantly, and on landlords always having liquid funds to return deposits on time. When both assumptions broke simultaneously, the chain reaction was nearly impossible to contain. The human cost of the Jeonse collapse has been severe and concentrated. South Korean courts and legal aid organizations reported a surge in eviction and deposit recovery lawsuits from 2022 onward. Many victims were young couples and single workers in their 20s and 30s who had pooled family savings, sometimes across 2 generations, to fund a single Jeonse deposit. The South Korean government announced emergency relief measures in 2023, including a dedicated Jeonse fraud victim support fund and faster court procedures. But legal advocates noted that recovery of lost deposits in fraud cases remained slow and partial. The crisis also deepened a broader housing anxiety that Statistics Korea data shows is already acute among younger Koreans, contributing to declining marriage and birth rates that the OECD has flagged as among the lowest in the developed world. The Jeonse collapse did not just destroy savings. It destroyed the financial roadmap that an entire generation had been handed. Korea's Jeonse crisis is not simply a local curiosity. It is a precise case study in what happens when a financial system optimized for one set of conditions persists long after those conditions have changed. Informal credit mechanisms, built on the assumption of permanently rising asset prices, exist in dozens of economies around the world. The specific tool differs. Rotating savings clubs in West Africa, informal landlord deposit networks in parts of Southeast Asia, sale and leaseback arrangements misused in Southern Europe. But the underlying structure is often the same. Trust substitutes for regulation, rising prices substitute for solvency, and the system feels stable right up until it does not. What Korea is now learning, painfully, is that any housing system in which ordinary families carry the full credit risk of private landlords is a system waiting for its stress test. The lesson for policymakers elsewhere is both simple and uncomfortable. Financial innovation that bypasses formal protection is not innovation at all. It is deferred risk handed to the people who can least afford to absorb it.